Quarai is a ghost town. Red sandstone walls 40 feet high, still standing in central New Mexico. A church built in the shape of the Latin cross, 108 feet long, 28 feet wide. Foundations 7 feet deep, walls 6 feet thick at the base. Stone foundations of a pueblo with 1,000 rooms housing 600 or 700 people at its peak. Empty by 1678. Abandoned because of drought, famine, and Apache raids. Nobody has lived there since. Look it up on the National Park Service website, and it isn't called a ghost town. It's called a national monument. An archaeological site, a ruin. 25 miles south, the old mining camp of Kelly, New Mexico, sits in the same desert, occupied from the 1860s to the early 1900s. Smaller than Quarai ever was, lasted a fraction of the time, left behind a handful of wooden structures and a few mine tailings. But type New Mexico ghost towns into any search engine and Kelly appears on every list. Quarai doesn't make a single one. There's a word for places people lived and then left behind. Americans use that word freely for the mining era. For everything older, the Pueblo cities, the Spanish colonial missions, the frontier plazas, they reach for different language. Ruins, sites, monuments. As if age alone moves a place out of one category and into another. It doesn't, and the split hides something worth seeing. Quick note before we go further. Deep into history lives or dies on the subscribe count. If this is the kind of thing you watch for, you know what to do. The popular image of a Western ghost town is fixed in place. A wooden saloon with a swinging door, a prospector's shack on a hillside, a mine entrance boarded shut. Most of the roughly 4,000 ghost towns documented across the United States fit that image. Abandoned between the 1880s and the 1940s, casualties of mining busts, oil failures, railroad decisions, or the Dust Bowl. But underneath that layer, particularly in New Mexico and Arizona, there is an older one. It doesn't look like the mining towns. It's built differently, abandoned for different reasons, and recorded in different archives. The Spanish crown arrived in what is now New Mexico in 1540 when Francisco Vázquez de Coronado marched an armed expedition through Pueblo country looking for cities of gold. He found farming communities instead. No gold, no silver, and went home. But by 1598, Juan de Onate had brought 500 colonists up from Mexico City and established the first permanent European settlement north of the Rio Grande. Santa Fe was founded in 1610? That's a decade before Plymouth Rock. These settlements weren't improvised. They followed a specific blueprint, the Laws of the Indies, signed by King Philip II in 1573. 148 ordinances dictated how every new Spanish colonial town should be laid out. A central plaza. Grid streets at right angles, oriented by the prevailing winds. A church on the plaza's east side. Residential blocks in uniform lots. The planning drew on Renaissance-era urban design ideas, particularly the writings of the Italian architect Leon Battista Alberti and the ancient Roman engineer Vitruvius. Some southwestern settlements reflect these Spanish colonial planning rules. The grid wasn't mysterious or unexplained. It was documented policy, applied from Buenos Aires to Santa Fe. By the mid-1700s, Spanish settlers lived near mission communities across southern Arizona. Guayvavi, Tumacacori, Arivaca. Tubac became Arizona's first military garrison in 1752. Albuquerque was founded in 1706. Trade moved along the Camino Real from Mexico City to Santa Fe, a supply line where two-wheeled carretas with wooden axles squealed across the desert, audible for miles, carrying silver south and weapons north. Merchants in Tucson kept trade connections with commercial houses in Hermosillo and Guaymas. The Spanish population of New Mexico alone may have reached 25,000 by 1800, several times larger than the colonial holdings in Texas or California. In Arizona, Spanish miners had been working gold deposits in El Dorado Canyon as early as the 1700s. Small-scale silver operations dotted the territory. After Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, The missions were abandoned, military protection vanished, and Apache raids made most of the territory untenable. The rich mineral deposits that American prospectors would later exploit weren't unknown. They were unworkable. Nobody could survive long enough to mine them. This was not an empty wilderness waiting for American miners. It was a functioning colonial society layered on top of Pueblo communities that had been there for centuries before that. And both layers left ghost towns behind. The clearest examples sit in the Estancia Basin of central New Mexico, about 90 miles south of Albuquerque. 3 abandoned settlements, Gran Quivira, Quarai, and Abo, now form the Salinas Pueblo Mission's National Monument. Gran Quivira began as a Pueblo settlement around 800 AD. By the 1300s, Tompiro-speaking people had built multi-room stone pueblos on a high ridge overlooking the southern basin. The community grew into a major trade center linking the Great Plains, the Pacific Coast, and the Great Basin. At its peak, the pueblo housed as many as 3,000 people. They dug 32 wells in the dry landscape, some 50 feet deep. They mined and traded salt from nearby lakes. They were there for centuries before any European set foot in the valley. Spanish missionaries arrived in the 1620s. Fray Francisco de Letrado began construction on a church and convento in 1631. A larger church, San Buenaventura, was started after 1659 and never finished. By the 1660s, drought had settled over the region. In 1668, more than 450 people at Gran Quivira starved to death. A mass grave in the mission cemetery documents the scale. Apache raids intensified. In September 1670, raiders destroyed the mission, killed 11 people, and took 30 captives. By 1672, the settlement was empty. At Quarai, 8 miles north of the present-day town of Mountain Air, the story runs parallel. Tiwa-speaking Pueblo people settled there around 1250. Spanish missionaries built a church of local red sandstone between 1627 and 1632. The stone, cut from nearby formations, once covered in smooth adobe plaster that has long since weathered away. The walls still stand 20 feet tall. At their base, they measure 6 feet wide. Inside the mission compound, archaeologists found a kiva, a circular Pueblo ceremonial chamber built right into the Spanish convento, suggesting that for a time, at least, the two religions existed side by side under the same roof. The same combination of drought, famine, and Apache raids emptied the Pueblo by 678. The survivors walked to the Rio Grande and joined other Tiwa communities. The red walls stayed behind. These settlements were larger, older, and more architecturally complex than most of the mining camps that Americans call ghost towns. Gran Quivira was designated a national monument in 1909 by President Taft, one of the oldest in the Park Service system. Archaeologist Adolf Bandelier first mapped the ruins in 1883. Major James Henry Carleton had described them in a published pamphlet in 1855, just 2 years after the Gadsden Purchase. The records exist. They have existed for over a century. The question is, why these places don't appear in the same conversation as Bodie and Rhyolite? The Salinas Pueblos emptied before the Great Wave. The Great Wave came in 1680. On August 10 of that year, warriors from 19 Pueblo villages launched a coordinated attack on every Spanish settlement in New Mexico. A medicine man from San Juan Pueblo named Pope had organized the uprising, dispatching runners with knotted cords, 1 knot untied each morning, counting down to the strike. For 80 years, the Spanish had demanded forced labor, seized crops, and publicly punished Pueblo religious leaders for practicing their own ceremonies. In 1675, the governor arrested 47 medicine men. 3 were hanged. Pope was among those flogged and imprisoned. After his release, he built a coalition no Pueblo leader had built before. Communities separated by language, distance, and tradition, united by a common grievance the Spanish had given them. Inadvertently, the Spanish had provided the key ingredient for collective action. By 1680, every Pueblo community spoke Spanish. For the first time, they shared a common tongue. The revolt killed 400 settlers and 21 Franciscan priests. 2,000 colonists retreated south to El Paso. Every Spanish building in the territory was sacked or burned. Churches were torn down stone by stone. Fields were set alight. For 12 years, the Pueblo governed themselves. Pape ordered all vestiges of Spanish life destroyed. Many communities relocated to defensive mesa-top positions, places like Black Mesa, on San Ildefonso Pueblo land, where a revolt-era settlement sits on a volcanic outcropping high above the Rio Grande floodplain, visible for miles. When Diego de Vargas reconquered the province in 1692, he found empty towns where populated ones had been. Hawica, the largest Zuni pueblo, the first place Coronado reached in 1540, was abandoned entirely. The Zuni never went back. Neither did the Spanish. The stone walls are still there. The Spanish returned, but the landscape never fully recovered. Comanche and Apache raids over the next century emptied settlement after settlement. Colonial records are filled with petitions from settlers asking permission to abandon their land grants. Ojo Caliente, Embudo, Cundillo, founded, attacked, emptied, refounded, emptied again. Between 1760 and 1776, New Mexico's non-Pueblo population dropped from over 11,000. Comanche raiders killed 127 settlers and Pueblo people in 778 alone. The stone and adobe walls left behind are the same thing as a ghost town. They just predate the term. Here's the split that matters. When American miners abandoned a camp in 1890, it became a ghost town, a term that carries romance, nostalgia, and tourism dollars. When a Pueblo community and a Spanish mission were abandoned in 1678, the same kind of place became a ruin or an archaeological site, terms that carry distant academic framing, and a sense that the place belongs to a different category of history entirely. The language isn't neutral. Ghost town implies a place that was alive in living memory, or at least in the memory of the nation telling the story. Ruin implies something ancient, something foreign, something that belongs to a different people. Quarai's red sandstone church was completed in 1632. That's old, but it's not ancient. It's the same century as the founding of Boston. The people who built it have living descendants in Pueblo communities along the Rio Grande today. The records of its construction, its population, and its abandonment survive in Spanish colonial archives, in NPS research files, and in oral histories passed down by Tiwa speakers for 3.5 centuries. This is documented history, not deep time. When the United States took the Southwest after 1848, the new territorial governments started fresh records. They didn't systematically inherit Spanish or Mexican archives. American officials conducting the first territorial surveys often didn't read Spanish. The documents that would have explained the ruins on the land they were cataloging sat in repositories in Mexico City and Seville, written in a language they couldn't access. The ruins were filed as curiosities, undated, unattributed. A generation later, the mining boom produced its own abandoned towns, and those became the ghost towns Americans recognize. The older settlements sat in a different archive, in a different language, and, gradually, in a different category. The misclassification has stuck for 1.5 centuries. Across New Mexico and Arizona, the National Park Service maintains sites that are, by any functional definition, ghost towns. Tumacacori, the oldest mission site in Arizona, established in 1691. Services first held in a small adobe structure built by Pima inhabitants of the village. Hawiku, the largest Zuni pueblo, abandoned after the 1680 revolt. 6 large sandstone structures still recognizable at the site. The Salinas missions, empty since the 1670s. Pecos Pueblo, once a community of 2,000, abandoned in 1838 when the last 17 residents walked to Jumez Pueblo, 80 miles west, carrying what they could. These places had streets, churches, granaries, trade networks. Populations in the hundreds and thousands, they were abandoned because of drought, disease, war, and the collapse of the colonial system that surrounded them. By every measure except the one Americans settled on, they are ghost towns. The mining-era ghost towns are real, and their stories matter. Nobody is arguing otherwise. But they are not the oldest layer. Beneath them, sometimes literally beneath them, where American miners built camps on top of Spanish and Pueblo foundations, are places that emptied out a century or two earlier, for reasons that have nothing to do with silver prices or railroad schedules. Popular ghost town history focuses on mining busts. The fuller picture includes drought, disease, warfare, forced relocation, and the withdrawal of an empire that ran out of soldiers before it ran out of silver. The records aren't missing. They're on a different shelf, in a different language, under a different name. Quarai's walls are still standing. 20 feet of red sandstone, open to the sky where the roof collapsed after an Apache raid in 1830. The National Park Service charges no admission. The visitor center has a small museum with pottery shards and stone tools. A creek runs past the ruins, lined with cottonwoods. Most days, fewer than 100 people come through. Across New Mexico, the mining ghost towns draw tour buses and souvenir shops. The older places draw hikers and bird watchers and the occasional archaeologist with a grant and a trowel. The buildings are the same kind of empty. The silence is the same. The only difference is what we decided to call them. If this story stays with you for a while, that's the point. Thanks for watching.